Hello and welcome to Sage and Stone Homestead. If you have not met me yet, my name is Heather. I live with my husband Levi and our 4 children on almost 10 acres in southwestern Kentucky. We do a lot of things here on our homestead, but the main deal here, the main part of the show is our dairy goat herd. And we keep them for several reasons, but the main reason is their dairy. And one of my favorite ways to preserve and consume our milk is with milk kefir. So we're going to be talking about this today. This video has been a long time coming, and the opportunity to create it came up this month because it is Fermented February 2023. So we participated last year in Fermented February, where we made a Clabber cottage cheese, and we also did a Jun tea. And so I'm excited to come back again this year with kefir. So a little bit about the collaboration. It's being put on again by my friend Anna over at the Fermented Homestead, and there's a whole bunch of other channels that are also participating this month. One video is going up every day, and at the end of each week, Anna is actually going live and giving away a whole bunch of different things, from fermentation kits, books, gift cards, and different prizes from Haas Tools, because Haas Tools is sponsoring Fermented February this year, and I think that's pretty awesome. So head down to the description box and make sure that you are subscribed to all of those channels. Turn on your notifications so you can be notified when their Fermented February videos come live. You're going to want to watch them and comment them so you can be entered to win the prizes. Okay, so let's chat about kefir. So I have made yogurt quite a few times out of my goat's milk, and I have always been pretty disappointed in the result. For some reason, and I've tried a lot of different things, I can't manage to get a nice, super thick yogurt like I like to buy from the store. I really like a nice Greek yogurt, but it does take a whole ton of effort that I honestly don't have that much time and energy to put towards one thing, so I don't. Essentially, what you have to do is pasteurize your milk, add in a culture that is purchased from the store, or you can technically use the culture from an already established yogurt, but from what I understand, that is limited. Anywho, then you have to culture it at a certain temperature for a certain length of time, and if you want the yogurt to be thick, you've got to strain it through some kind of mesh bag or a yogurt strainer, and then you'll have your thick yogurt. And it honestly, it's a lot of work and a lot of attention, and I don't prefer it. I much prefer making kefir out of our goat's milk. It's essentially a drinkable yogurt, and it's a lot healthier, believe it or not, than yogurt is, and it is miles easier to do. And the good news is you don't need to have access to raw milk or own a dairy animal in order to make kefir. You actually don't really have to use dairy milk at all. From what I'm told, you can use plant-based milks, and that was news to me. I'm going to place a link down in the description box that explains that process. But as far as I know, it's essentially the same, so we're going to go through that process today. So here I have a finished batch of kefir. So we're going to kind of work a little bit backwards here, since I have the finished product to show you today, and I'm going to be setting up another round of kefir. So we'll start with the end product, and then I'll show you how I got here. So let's see if we can get it to come up on camera. Do you see all these little bubbles underneath here? This is how I know that my kefir is done. And if I were to leave this a few hours longer, there would be many more bubbles collecting on the outside of the glass. It's essentially separating the thick kefir from the side of the glass, and this is how I personally know that the kefir is thick and to my liking. So we pull off this fermentation cap here. You can see the kefir grains, and the grains are what makes this kefir so awesome. So a lot of kefirs that you can buy from the grocery store, they are made with very similar cultures, but they're nothing like the kefir grains. Let's strain these out and I will show you exactly what these look like. So what I have here to strain the kefir grains is a mesh sieve, like so. I have a canning funnel and then a jar. They do make really awesome kefir fermenters that have the sieve all in one, and they're really cool. I'll link some of those in the description box. Honestly, I wish I had one. That's pretty neat. Pour the grains and kefir through the sieve. You can see it's quite thick, which is awesome. And then in order to get things to go down, I'm going to give things a gentle tap. So See these here? It looks a lot like cottage cheese or a lot like cauliflower. These are the kefir grains. And if you're familiar with things like kombucha and the SCOBY that forms on top of a kombucha, this is basically a SCOBY, but for kefir. So these kefir grains are what creates the kefir. It's what makes the milk into kefir. So I'm going to reuse these. I'm gonna plop them over, whoop, there you go. Plop them straight in here. That's probably way more kefir grains than I'm gonna need, but we'll go over that in just a little bit. I'll get the rest strained here real quick. When you buy kefir from the store, it isn't usually made with kefir grains. There are packets of kefir culture that you can buy that, like, they work and they make a tasty product, but like I had mentioned before, the grains provide you with about 61 different strains of bacteria and yeasts. The little powdered cultures, they're only going to give you about 12. So it's not near the variety, and it really isn't something that you can reuse. These guys are infinitely reusable, and in fact, they grow. So this is not the amount of kefir grains that I actually started out with. I think I started with about a tablespoon a while back, and it's at least double that now. So it's really cool to be able to share and pass on. Okay, right here we have our first fermentation of the kefir. At this point, I could flavor it and leave it on the counter to ferment some more. I don't usually do that. I just stick it straight into the fridge and I will flavor it right before drinking it, but you could do that. Kefir is safe to keep out on the counter for about 1 to 2 days. In the refrigerator, it's good for about 3 weeks, and you can even freeze it for about 1 to 2 months. And kefir has this effervescence to it that really is caused by the yeast that is in the culture. It's a little bit like yogurt champagne, the tingles that it puts in your mouth, and it's quite lovely. It sounds strange, but it's really awesome. And when placing a tight cap over it like this, I can actually kind of capture those bubbles in here and encourage them to create more effervescence. And it will do that in the refrigerator as well. It just ferments a little bit slower. Okay, remember I said we were working a little bit backwards today because of the way that I had things going, but we have these kefir grains that I actually bought online, and I'll link the store that we bought them from in the description box below. And we do use our raw goat's milk in our kefir. A lot of people say that it's hard to use raw goat's milk in kefir grains or to make kefir because raw milk has its own cultures, and that is true. So if you are going to be using raw milk to create your own kefir using kefir grains, you want to start out slow because you want to give the kefir grains as much opportunity to overpower the cultures in the milk as you possibly can. So initially, when I used my first tablespoon of kefir grains, I only gave about 4 ounces of milk, and I strained it out right about every 12 hours until I was starting to get a really active kefir culture going on. Eventually, you're going to notice that at that 12-hour mark, you're going to have a much thicker product than you originally started out with. Really, the goal for me is to see those bubbles that we saw right before straining. That's how I know my kefir is at the consistency that I really like. And it does even thicken up more than that in the refrigerator. I like it to be basically as thick as possible, but you can't let your brand new dormant kefir grains go for, 36 hours like I do. Initially, you want to start out a smaller amount of milk in a shorter length of time while those grains are waking up. So in general, the more grains that you have in a lesser volume of milk, the more opportunity you give those grains to overpower the raw milk cultures themselves and create a kefir culture. So you can see it's a lot more liquidy in there than when we had strained the kefir, so it's not kefir yet. And on the note of giving the kefir grains the best opportunity to be able to reproduce, you want to use milk that is as fresh as possible, whether you're using store-bought milk or raw milk. And that's because older milk just is automatically going to have a little bit more bacteria in it, good or bad, and the more bacteria is in the milk is going to make it harder for the kefir cultures to take over. So what I'm putting over my jar right now is actually a vented lid from Fermentaholics. I'll link these down below. I love them. It allows this culture to breathe without really allowing any other kinds of yeasts or molds or things to enter the jar. And I just poured this straight out of the fridge. I could have taken it straight out of the goat and strained it and put it right in here. And this is just gonna sit on my counter for around 36 hours for me, because these cultures are good and active until I see those bubbles on the edge, and I'll just repeat what we did earlier. So that's an example of one of the many ways that kefir to me is far superior than yogurt. I didn't have to pasteurize my milk, and I don't have to worry about incubating the kefir at 115 degrees like you do with yogurt for a certain amount of time. It's gonna ferment on the counter. It is the simplest thing. It's a good idea to take some kind of swizzle stick or spoon or something to stir up the kefir right about every 12 hours. It just helps distribute those grains throughout the milk and helps get an even culture. It's not super necessary, like you don't have to keep on top of it, but while you're thinking about it, if you have a couple minutes just to give it a good stir or a couple seconds, that's going to be beneficial. So when it comes to consuming your kefir, this is a bigger batch that I did. This is all that I do. So as I mentioned before, you could do a second fermentation for 1 to 2 days on the counter and get a few more bubbles and a little bit more bacterial culture going in there. But what I do is I just pour the first fermentation kefir out, like so. You see how thick that is? Wonderful. Give myself some headspace for my add-ins. So see the texture? It's a nice, basically a drinkable yogurt, and it smells a lot like yogurt too. And I have this drink mix that I like to add for a little bit of flavor and a little bit of sweetness. Another thing you can do is squirt in a little bit of honey or maple syrup. I have done dollops of jelly or jam and swizzled it around in there for flavor. Really, the options are endless and all up to your tastes. And at this point, it's just easy as drinking it. The effervescent tingle of it, you just have to experience it to really understand what I mean by that. It's a lot like champagne. It's definitely not as harsh as like a bubble in soda, or even as harsh as you would find in kombucha. It's a lot more, I don't know, it's a lot more delicate, a lot more sizzly. So remember how I talked about those kefir grains? They'll just keep multiplying and multiplying and multiplying. If you had friends to share them with, that's awesome. My recommendation to you is to actually put a little bit of milk and probably a tablespoon of extra grains in a baggie, take all the air out of it and place it in the freezer just in case something happens to your original set of grains. You can keep them in the freezer like that and revive them as needed or give them away as needed. When we have extra grains here, because they already have a stash of them in my fridge, I like to feed them to my animals. It's a great probiotic boost for them, and I mean, it can't hurt. And if you didn't have animals, you could always compost it too. But also check Facebook and other groups like that, because there's usually a lot of people looking for kefir grains, and that may be where you can find local grains too. You might not have to have them shipped in. Making kefir at home is really easy, but it's not an exact science. So what I've done here today, what I've showed you today, is what works here for me in the environment of my kitchen and with the specific kefir grains that I have. Start out slow, play around with things, and if you do happen to get a little bit of fuzzy mold on top of your kefir grains, let's say you let them sit a little bit too long, either on the counter or in the refrigerator, and they started to develop a little bit of a white fuzz, you can, and I've done this twice and it's been successful, put them in your strainer and run a non-chlorinated water over them and rinse them really, really well, and then put them in some fresh milk to wake them back up. That's worked for me both times that I've done it. So if you do get a little bit of mold, that's definitely an option, or you could go to your freezer grains that hopefully you had put away and just start over that way. And if you don't necessarily want to be making kefir Kefir every other day or every 2 days. You can, like I mentioned before, put some grains in the freezer, or what I have done several times in the past is just put the whole fermentation vessel in the refrigerator. You want to stir it and refresh it about every week, but the fermentation process is going to continue in the refrigerator. It's just going to take a little bit longer. So if you need things to take a little bit longer, or you want things to take a little bit longer, you don't need as quick of a turnaround, try fermenting it in the fridge. It does work. While researching for this video and brushing up on my kefir knowledge, I found a very, very interesting history of kefir. It was actually originally stored in goat skin or goat stomach bags, and they would hang the bags in the door frames or under the tables, and to stir it, they would basically hit it or kick it when they passed it, and the grains themselves were actually very, very coveted, and it took a long time for kefir grains to be traded at all. They were very revered. So if you're interested in nerding out about that, visit the pinned comment and you can read all about the very interesting history of this very, very cool probiotic food. So if the only kefir that you've had the chance to try is kefir from the grocery store, definitely give homemade kefir a try. There really is, it's just next level. Like I said, it has many more probiotics in it, many more beneficial yeasts, and it has 3 times the probiotic content of your standard everyday grocery store yogurt, and it's obviously a lot easier to make. So guys, don't forget to check out all of the other channels that are participating in the Fermented February 2023. I do have another installment coming up soon, so I hope to see you back here for that. Quite a few of our dairy goats are going to be giving birth this spring. I've got one birth every week from about March through mid-May. So if that sounds fun and interesting, make sure you subscribe before you leave.